Good morning from sunny Alberta. It's a beautiful day, just sitting outside, soaking up the rays. I guess I'm doing my semi-monthly, bi-weekly, whatever you call it, outdoor news segment, at least before it snows. Just talking to, hopefully, my fellow Canadians, just so we can bypass the crap and just talk to each other. I think that's what we need to do, is talk to each other more. And talk about the things that are going on. Recently in the news, the Liberals have eased up on the random COVID testing at airports because of the delays it's causing and the backlash and the bad publicity. Anyone who's watched my videos or looks at the provincial COVID data knows that recently, at least in the last half a year or so, the majority of COVID infections, hospitalizations, patients in the ICU, and sadly recently deaths are vaccinated people. And I believe this is why it's getting harder and harder to find that information. I just checked the Ontario database, and they're not updating the one website I check all the time anymore. So, for obvious reasons probably. So, all the Liberals have done really is ease the restrictions on the group of people who are the vast majority of spreaders of COVID. And it's just funny because they use the numbers against us, right? Every day it was like a stadium scoreboard. It was how many deaths today, how many infections, on and on and on. This province, that province. I mean, we knew how many people had died every day. It was forced on us, like a death clock on our TV screens and cell phones. And they forced those numbers on us to enact restrictions, lockdowns, segregate society, everything that happened. And now they barely talk about those numbers. And when they do talk about them, they don't mention any of the data that I often talk to you folks about. So it's just funny how they use those numbers like a baseball bat, and now they don't talk about them. And now they hardly report them. So, anyway. Also, what's really been bugging me, I think, is about the whole thing, is Canadians, on a large part, just don't seem to care. We were force-fed fear 24/7. People were locked down, rights were restricted, rights were removed, still are in some cases. People were fired, society segregated, and all the confrontation and anger and the crap about masks and all the stuff that happened in stores and businesses all across our country. The delayed in children's learning and their social skills and the damage that's going to do. The damage to mental health, families, health in general, debt, alcohol and drug addiction, overdose deaths. I mean, it seems, even though it's nice and beautiful outside, it seems like a lot of all the terrible things that could increase in Canada, from economic to social, have increased, from inflation to mental illness and everything in between. And there's been no accountability for any of that. And it just seems like Canadians, on the large part, like I said, don't care. And you have to forgive me, I don't remember the exact quote, but the messaging behind it is something similar to, well, they came for those people and I said nothing. And then they came for that group and I did nothing. And then one day they came for me and there was no one left to help. And that's kind of what I feel like we're in right now. and all these people just wanting basic freedom and human rights respected in Canada were demonized and dehumanized and sometimes beaten and pepper sprayed and trampled with horses and rifle butted. And Trudeau keeps talking about threats to democracy and that, but the biggest threat I see are the people in charge. They've been caught repeatedly now lying about the Emergency Act. They said that the police encouraged them or asked them for it or advised them to do it, and then it's come out that they did not do that, and that the Liberal politicians involved have lied. And there were existing laws that could have handled anything. And I assume, again, there'll be no accountability, and everybody involved will just get off scot-free, and it'll be forgotten about with the next scandal or two or whatever the media distracts us with. So yeah, you know, there's a lot of positives here. We have a beautiful country and wonderful people and wide open spaces and clean, fresh environment for the most part. Hardworking people, innovative. You know, there's a lot of positives here. But in a lot of ways, we have a government that's just not making decisions that I think are the best for us. And most of Canada doesn't seem to care. So little by little, they chip away rights, they chip away privileges, they chip away here, you know, they cut us up into little boxes. It's called identity politics, right? You're all divided by race, religion, everything, skin tone, region, gender, sexuality. They try to cut you up into little tiny boxes and separate us all, because together we're strong. Divided, we fall, right? You guys know know the saying there. So I don't know what it's going to take for Canadians to go, well, what's happened here isn't right. And since my last video, I have looked at some of the reports of what people have been documenting from lockdowns and restrictions, the effect on people, mental health, suicide, things like that. It's just very hard to get accurate information because, unlike most countries, Canada is generally 2 years behind in data. So while a lot of countries can already see a lot of official 2021 data, us in Canada don't. We still see mostly 2020 data, and it's now 2022. And this is climate data, suicide, everything StatsCan basically is for the most part 2 years behind. But they were able to give us up-to-date COVID death numbers like by the hour with like running tickers on the TV screen, right? When those numbers were to their advantage. So I hope it doesn't get worse, but I do hope a lot of Canadians wake up and say, hey, you know, the rights that have been taken and the use of the Emergency Act and all the things that have happened, I hope enough people wake up and ask questions. We don't see reports on what happened to all the businesses that will never open again, or the families that were destroyed, or the mums or dads that may have offed themselves, unfortunately, because of financial stress or whatever. I mean, the effects from lockdowns and COVID will be felt probably for generations, especially, you know, doubling our federal debt and the mental illness and the effect on children. I mean, we've just terrified an entire generation of, like, you know, whoever can go to school, 5-year-olds to 16, 18-year-olds in high school. I mean, this is the time of their life where they're supposed to learn and socialize and become a person, get their own personality and thoughts. And a lot of that was restricted, the social aspect of life, making them afraid of each other, afraid of germs and doorknobs and wearing masks and all the stuff that happened. And quite often it was a knee-jerk reaction. At first, when COVID came out, they were all telling us not to worry about it. And the media in the beginning of 2020 was talking about, comparing it to flu deaths and things like that. I believe it was about March or April of 2020. They even reported it on CBC. This is when mentioning China or mentioning border closures, they were calling those kind of people racist. So it went from, don't worry about it, it's not a big deal, and if you want borders closed, you're racist, or you don't like Asian people or Chinese people, which nobody was saying. People were afraid at the time. We didn't know, We didn't know how bad it was in the spring of 2020. We were seeing a lot of videos out of China, which we now know a lot of them were fake, but at the kicking off of COVID, a lot of people were worried. It looked bad. Italy looked bad. The numbers looked bad, right? And simply wanting airports shut down to stop the spread of a disease because it's not swimming across the ocean. If it came from another country, it had to get into Canada somehow. It didn't ride a horse or take a taxi. So people just wanted everyone protected. And the government left the borders open for most of 2020, which allowed COVID to spread. And if the government numbers are to be believed, it killed a lot of people. And there's no report about this. There's nobody saying anything about that. They blamed Canadians. And they left the borders open. So it went from, we're not that concerned about it, if you want the borders closed, you're racist, to, oh my God, you're a non-essential worker. You're not worthy of going to work. So you have to stay home. Or you have to be segregated. Or if you don't wear a mask, you want to kill grandmas. They were even talking about at one point, do we even help unvaccinated people in the hospital? That was an actual discussion in Canada. If an unvaccinated person goes to the hospitals and the hospitals are overwhelmed, do we help these people? And there was a lot of nastiness and a lot of hateful things being said from the government and people. And it was just sad to see the breakdown of Canadians caring about each other. We used to do that, right? We used to do that. So I hope enough Canadians wake up and see that if somebody's rights are taken, that they're also yours. If somebody wants a handgun in the future for legal purposes, they no longer can. Soon it'll be all guns, probably. The government can just justify using the War Measures Act or Emergencies Act over a protest with bouncy castles where they fed the homeless and cleaned the streets based on lies and media reports that were later retracted. And then you have BLM protests where they're literally burning, looting, killing people, destroying cities and towns, and the Prime Minister goes outside and kneels with these people. Kneels in solidarity as police across the country knelt. What happened to that Mr. Floyd gentleman was terrible, but he wasn't a good guy. He didn't deserve to die, and that police officer is dealing with that, and he got what he deserved. He failed, and he killed a guy. And maybe the drugs in Mr. Floyd's system were a part of that too, I don't know. But that right there sparked protests across the world, with leaders going outside to kneel as statues are torn down and buildings are burned, police stations, people are killed and beaten in the streets. And the politicians back that up. Now, if a Canadian politician defended the Freedom Convoy or stood outside with a Canadian flag or talked to the truckers, they're demonized. Like they did something wrong, or they're okay with racism because one guy out of 100,000 people in a crowd has a stupid flag. This is how they divide us and split us up into these boxes. So I hope before it's too late, enough Canadians wake up. And I hope soon we get our rights back. And again, never forget that they were taken. Have a great day.